Thanks, Ron. Yeah, so I'm Zach Kreider, Director of Strategy and AI here at Trellix. And today, like Ron said, we're just going to take you through just threat activity that we've seen over, the past 6 months. And so a lot of times working with our customers, they always come to us and say, we saw this detection, either from a Trellix solution or non-Trellix solution, but really what does it mean? Like, is this associated with a particular threat actor or a particular, threat campaign? Do you see other customers in our region or other regions where they're being targeted by this? Or what about our industry? Do you see that being targeted? So we'll dive in just some contextual information of what we've seen with activity over the past 6 months and the different groups and nation states of how we've correlated all this information with. But before I dive into that, just want to give some background of kind of how we do our threat research. So within Trellix, our threat intelligence group, or TIG, is the primary team that actually does the threat research for Trellix internally and also externally for customers. So we have about over 200 researchers spread across the globe in multiple time zones. They work 24/7 of just doing research on the dark web, researching telemetry that we get back in, just trying to correlate and find different metrics of kind of what's going on in the cyber threat landscape. Majority of those are based either in the Eastern US or in Europe. But also too, our team, they speak multiple languages, and that's really important when they start diving into the underground. And they have to go through a lot of the different forums or looking through code, just because it'll be either Russian or Chinese or German, right? And they have to be able to decipher kind of what's going on there. But also, not only do they do the research internally for Trellix, but we also have researchers that are embedded with customers. So customers may need threat researchers in their SOC to do proactive threat research on their behalf to let them know here's some stuff going on in the underground they need to be aware of, or particular threat actors or threat campaigns that could be targeting them. They help those customers where they're embedded with the SOC to be proactive to be able to block those attacks. But then also to other customers just want to know, hey, are we being targeted by any threat actors, threat campaigns, or nation states? What should we be aware of? What are IOCs that we can proactively hunt for to see if we've been breached? So they do provide regular briefings to customers, both at the SOC level and always up to the executive level on that side. So kind of how Trellix does our research is obviously we have close to over 400,000 or 40,000 customers worldwide with different solutions from Trellix, whether endpoint solutions, network, or email, and all those different products are seeing different types of telemetry back to Trellix that we're able to use in our research. Along that too, we have a lot of partnerships, both with the public and private sector, where they do share data with us of kind of what they're seeing in the threat landscape, that we actually use all that information to correlate it all up and provide that back into our products and do threat reports. So we're able to say, where do we see all these attacks occurring? Are we starting to see new campaigns or new threat groups kind of pop up? What are IOCs that customers can leverage to actually do proactive hunting in their environment to see if they've been breached or if they have those actors in their environment? And so when you think about that, we have close to 660 million endpoints worldwide. And all those endpoints, if they have internet connectivity, are sending us telemetry back of, what are they detecting? Or, they observed a file, it didn't block it, but it saw this activity on, a laptop, for example. So our team gets all that rich telemetry back that they can look into and use that to correlate it. They also clean that up and anonymize it, so there's no personal information in it. And all those endpoints, they actually reach back to see, hey, this file launched, or we saw this IP address, is it malicious? So on any given day, we have over about 600 billion queries back to Trellix from all these different products of saying, hey, is this stuff bad? Should I block it? What can you tell me about it? And all that leads into about 10 terabytes of threat telemetry that feed into our backend on a daily basis that then ultimately go back into the products so customers can start taking advantage of that information. So a little bit about how we kind of do that process. So our team, they gather statistics, trends, and insights that comprise a lot of data to actually build out kind of what they're seeing on the global landscape. So we have captive sources. So in some cases, telemetry is generated by the Trellix solutions within the customer's environment, and the defense frameworks that they have deployed around the world in both public and private sector. But also too, we have a lot of customers where they do a lot of hosting as well for customers. So information coming back from their infrastructure and data services. And these generate millions and billions of data points that we can leverage to do our research. We also leverage a lot of open source as well. So we leverage a lot of patent, proprietary, open source tools to scrape sites, gather logs through data repositories on the internet, as well as dark websites or leak sites where malicious actors may publish information about they originally breached this customer, or they're planning to launch this new malware service, for example, or just data dumped belonging to ransomware victims where customers may not be aware that their data has been dumped. And then we essentially normalize all that data, which feeds into our insights or Atlas platforms that give customers access to the threat data to be able to contextualize it, do their own research, their environment. But we leverage machine learning, automation, and just humans in the whole process to really cycle through all that data, which is very intensive. It's integrated, and building out and normalizing the data for customers to leverage and enriching the data. That way the products can start taking advantage of it. And we're able to boil that down to what are the attack methods that we're seeing, what are the threat actors, agents, sectors, regions, strategies that we're seeing from like folks, and what are the outcomes that they're shooting for. And then through the analysis, right, we're able to go through all that information. One, to the extensive knowledge base we're building internally in Trellix that we can leverage for our customers and our products, but also building out and publishing, cybersecurity reports, and also pulling in reports from, highly respected and accredited sources. And then just experience of the team to actually investigate all this information, pull it together. And that team has a lot of reverse engineering folks on it, forensic scientists, and vulnerability experts that are able to pull that all together. And once they're able to correlate, clean up the data, normalize it, then it goes back directly into our products. So let's dive in to really see some of the top APT activity we've seen over the past 6 months. So the United States, had to be number one in this one. So we're still the most targeted region in the globe, followed by Turkey, Hong Kong, India, and Brazil as the most targeted regions across the globe. If you look at ransomware just by itself, we saw a much bigger hit for the transportation and shipping sector. And so for about Q4 2023 and Q1 2024, that sector alone generated around 50% of the global ransomware detections, respectively, and that which was followed by the finance industry. In the rapidly evolving cyber threat landscape, APT groups continue to pose, a significant threat and challenge to the global cybersecurity space. What we try to do is thoroughly analyze all the activity that we're able to gather associated with APTs. In this case, what we're going to go through today is, from Q4 of last year up to Q1, mid Q2 of this year. Really, the analysis focuses on the origins of these threats, what are their main targets, the tools used in their operations. We're able to compare findings to the data from the first half of the year into this year using two key metrics: percentage of variance and proportional contribution variance. And so when we look at percentage variance, the metric helps us see if the activity of a specific ATP group, the targeting of certain countries or the use of particular tools has gone up. Is it going down or stayed the same over time? And really understanding this helps us track how the behaviors of these threat actors change and how the overall threat landscape is evolving. On the proportional contribution variance, this metric adds context by not just showing the raw change in activity, but how this change stands against the backdrop of the entire cybersecurity threat environment. For example, if we see detections of a particular actor have increased significantly, this might represent a small part of the total cyber threats if the overall threat environment has become much busier. Conversely, if their detections have decreased, but the rest of the threat environment is slowly slowed down even more, this actor could be becoming more relevant or more significant in the space. And so by employing these metrics, we aim to provide like a nuanced understanding of the shifts of APT activity, enabling us to draw insights into their strategic objectives, preferred methodologies, cybersecurity challenges that they pose. And going into these findings, we'll be shedding light of the intricate world of APTs and kind of what we're seeing focus on. So as you can see here, Russia is probably the biggest one that we saw the majority of APT activity from, and just targeting outside just ransomware government agencies. So whether state, local, or national governments were the biggest targets, and then followed by the financial institutions. Sandworm, which we'll show here in a minute, is one of the top APT actors coming out of Russia. And so just over this time frame, the telemetry that we're able to gather from Trellix, so we had close to 1.6 billion detections across that time frame, that 6-month period, with about 44 million unique MD5s that then got pushed down to the products they could take advantage of. And all this correlated back to about 4,000 different threat campaigns that we saw across the globe. So as geopolitical tensions rise, so does APT activity across the entire ecosystem. While APT threats grow overall, Russian-linked sandworm team was detected 40% more in that period as we go through the data. Also, too, if you see the chart down below, the blue line are all the APT groups that are linked to Russia. And then the green is just the Sandworm group by themselves. And you can see they're making up the majority of that activity that we're seeing coming out of Russia, targeting these different industries and these different geos. And later the report will also show how we're actually able to see all these spikes. So not only are they just attacking industries, but we try to go with like what's going on to cause these spikes and detections. And in a later slide, I'll be able to show you that, when we see these big spikes of detections coming out of Russia in particular, doing correlation of what kind of occurred around that time frame, we actually found out like a lot of times when they're launching like different military campaigns in Ukraine, for example, we saw a bigger spike in activity than when they weren't launching big rocket campaigns or drone campaigns as an example. But I'll be able to show some of that here in a minute. So if we look at just Russia alone, these are the big groups that we actually track that are coming out of Russia. You can see the Sandworm team, they're the predominant, biggest one that's coming out of there. But if you go down the list, like some of these are probably ones you're probably familiar with, like the Conti ransomware group or Royal ransomware group. They make up smaller detections, but if you look back over, months ago, right, when a lot of these groups started getting broken up by federal agencies, different members start getting arrested, you see a huge decline in their activity. But then a lot of those people that, didn't get arrested or happen from federal agency, they move into other groups. And then also too, we see more sponsorship coming from the nation states. They're really funneling this. And then also too, on the generative AI front, we're actually seeing a lot more of these groups leverage generative AI because it's really lowered the barrier to one, be able to write code, but especially from a phishing standpoint, they're able to craft really, really efficient phishing emails that have the right company logos, the right different personas of, hey, this is coming from a VP or the CEO using their language, essentially, or even to like generating code where it'll generate new hashes every time the code's compiled or reach out to write code in different languages on the endpoint, just really throw people off. So we're seeing a lot more of these AT groups leverage generative AI in that manner to make things more efficient on their side, because it's more cost effective to have Gen AI write the code instead of having to have a bunch of developers, and then they can share the code and modify it as they go. Also, too, for the Iranian side of things, too, we also saw an expansion of Iranians' cyber operations, but more so within their region, with obviously their involvement in the Israel-Hamas war. We saw much more operations occur really for like espionage, right? So trying to steal data or get sensitive data, but also to like other misinformation campaigns kicked off, but also trying to do destructive activities of taking out different networks or different companies in Israel, right? And so there's a mix of state-backed from Iranian APT groups and just hacktivists within the country that we see. But what was really interesting when we started diving into this data of looking at all the stuff coming out from Iran is on the top chart, this is all the activity from Iranian APT groups that were targeted just at the United States. And what was really interesting when we started digging the data is if you look, when the Israel-Hamas war was going on, you see a huge drop-off of the US being targeted, but then you see a huge spike starting to occur for Israel attack, right? So essentially they shifted their entire focus of, trying to go after US companies and just started focusing on Israel companies or Israel infrastructure for their activities. If we look to Muddy Water and APT-34, they're probably the two biggest ones that we see as far as activity coming out of Iran. But if you look at this chart, like I said, most of them pivoted from targeting US companies or US sectors and actually pivoted to actually target Israeli companies and Israeli different industry there. Also, too, like another very dominant one that we see are threat actors coming out of North Korea. The Lazarus group, they're probably the most predominant one coming out of there. And I'll show a slide here in a minute as well. We're seeing a lot more activity in North Korea when particular military drills occur with South Korea or just different missile launches occur. We see a larger spike in their activity versus when none of that's going on. But I'll show that here in a minute. We're also seeing China is also outside Russia, probably the most predominant one where we're seeing attacks come out of. We're seeing close to 22% of detections originating out of China are directed at governments worldwide, so not just the United States. So we're seeing more targeted of federal, state, and local governments across the globe, whether in the United States, Europe, APJ, or even Latin America. That's really where they've been focusing a lot of their focus on for their attacks. We've also seen too a little bit of decline over the last couple months, really from activity coming from China, which could mean quite a few things. One, there was a lot of press around like Volt Typhoon at the team, and so we saw a decline in their activity. But also too, we could actually see LS where maybe they're not being focused on a lot of companies; they're going silent. Maybe building different tools or different malware, and then you'll see a spike here in the coming months coming out of China for their different activity that's coming out of there. But as you can see too, like government was their biggest focus, followed by banking and financial, and then wholesale, which is kind of like manufacturing, falls under where the big three areas or sectors that the Chinese APT groups really were trying to target. So China leaked threat groups remain obviously the most prolific ATP activity, with over 21 million detections coming out of those groups, with the line groups aligned to China. Over 23% of those detections were malicious activities directed at the governments worldwide that we show. Like I said, those are even state and local, so we're seeing a lot of activity, even for smaller agencies that may not be connected to the federal government, but like local governments, like city governments or city municipalities, or even like water plants or electric facilities. We're seeing a lot more activity pointed at those, and not so much at the federal side. So it's kind of spread across the board of the activity that we're actually seeing coming out of China. So one of those is Volt Typhoon. So they're the ones that they're really going after infrastructure, or we see a lot of their activity going after infrastructure, so like the water or electricity, municipality type sectors is what they really target for. But what's also interesting about this, so around October, November last year, there was a lot of press released just around Volt Typhoon, just, hey, we know they're related to China, or it's China sponsored. And so you saw a huge drop off in actually their activity, and really over, in the spring, they really shot back up, right? So they're still a relatively new state sponsored APT group. They stand out though because of their unique behavior and patterns and targeting practices. So since about mid-January, like we detected over like 7,100 malicious activities associated with Volt Typhoon, with periodic spikes throughout the period of January all the way through March. Nation-state threat actor groups, continue to pose the biggest threat to commercial and public sector organizations worldwide during the last quarter of 2023 and into the first quarter and second quarter of 2024. These adversaries often well-equipped, well-funded, and adept to sophisticated cyber-enabled threats. They relentlessly target networks over long periods of time. They have superior talent and resources compared to maybe just the cyber criminal organizations they see or hacktivist counterparts. Specifically, some telemetry that we saw from China's associated nation-state sponsored threat actor groups have posed increasing threats to organizations, and our data shows over 21 million detections of threat activities from China, and from that group originated really between October of last year and March of this year. We're also seeing a lot more correlated attacks to geopolitical factors, right? So our team has done some research, and from activity from October through March of this year, really revealed a shift in threat activities with a noticeable increase in geopolitical motivated cyber threat operations. Notably, major regional and global events such as military exercises, political or economic summits, political conventions, and elections drove a lot of the cyber threat activities that we saw. Our analysts were able to assess, with moderate confidence that threat actors focus on these events to collect relevant intelligence about counterparts, probe networks proactively to obtain information for situational awareness, or even preposition on networks to strategically launch future attacks, right? So planting malware, planting things in these networks that they could leverage in the future. These are just some other core things that we saw. So if we go back to the Israel-Hamas war of what we showed, like I said, we saw a huge shift from targeting the United States over to Israel. But what was really interesting too about this is we actually see lulls in the attack activity based on kind of what's going on. So threat actors from the Iranian ATP threat actor groups have also been driven by political developments surrounding the Israel-Hamas war. So when we see surges of malicious activity in the Hamas war, usually it's too when big campaigns are kicking off as well on their side. But we also saw a reduction in threat activity from Iranian APT groups targeting U.S. organizations during that time, especially when there was conversations going on about hostage exchange or ceasefire agreements, or even humanitarian ceasefire on the Gaza Strip, as an example. You saw like a lot of the activity just dropped off, right? Or it was very minimal. And after those talks, whatever occurred, then you see a big spike after those particular activities. Also, too, they've deployed a lot of different TTPs, including phishing, information stealers, backdoors, downloaders, across the board. We're seeing them leverage during that period of time. Also, like I talked before on the Russian-Ukraine war side of things, continued kinetic warfare in the region has been accompanied by cyber initiatives, large and small. Most notably, Russian actors have been observed leveraging new and more advanced wiper malware to wipe thousands of virtual servers and PCs, attacking Ukraine telecom provider Kyivstar as an example. But here too, you can see how they're leveraging the malware. So when there was a meeting between Zelensky and President Biden, there was a huge uptick in actually activity coming from Russian APT groups. Then it fell off after that meeting, but then we started seeing another kind of correlating event of when Russia was launching large airstrikes or drone campaigns, there'd be a large attack coming from their APT groups coming out, targeting the United States, Europe, and Ukraine as well. It was really interesting to be able to correlate the cyber activity to what they were doing from a military standpoint. Also, too, the U.S. military drills in South Korea. So we also saw a large spike, too. So during this, the drills going on between the United States and South Korea, there was a large increase in activity coming from North Korea. So we saw repeated surges during the threat activity, during that military exercise from March 4th to March 14th. So these drills are designed to reflect, the Korea theater of operations to counter, North Korea. Specifically, detections in North Korea exceeded over 150,000 detections in March 7th and March 13th, so respectively, which is around 7 times the usual daily detections in the country, which we usually see about 20,000 coming from South Korea during that time. Also, too, correlating some data is we're able to correlate every time North Korea would get ready to launch a missile, there's a huge spike in activity coming out of North Korea. Once the missile's launched, it actually goes back to very minimal activity. Then you see a large spike again when they go to launch missiles. Just targeting either U.S. or just the different South Korea, Australia, and countries of that nature. And lastly, too, we see a correlation too coming out of China as well. So the APEC summit, which is economic summit that involved the United States, China, and definitely several other countries. So once it started, we saw a little bit of activity coming, but then when there was just the finance minister meeting, which it didn't have China included in that meeting, there was a large spike in activity coming from Chinese APT groups. But then you see a huge drop off, right? When Biden and Xi met as a summit, you saw a huge drop off in activity coming out of China. And we assume a lot of that was probably to preserve their public image and international reputation because they didn't want to get flagged if they're hacking all these systems or launching a lot of ransomware while the two leaders from two countries are meeting. So we see a lull after that meeting. It shoots back up from activity that we're seeing. So all this stuff is what our threat research team researches on a regular basis. Like I said, we publish reports that customers can take advantage of. All the data, the IP addresses, hashes, techniques and tools that are used by these go directly back to our products. So whether using our endpoint solution, our EDR solutions, network, or email, all of them can take advantage of this rich data that we actually collect from the cyber threat landscape. So if you have any questions, definitely feel free to reach out. We also can do threat reports for you as well. So if you just want to know, are you being targeted or just what does your threat vulnerability look like? We can provide those reports for you.